So, quick introduction for myself. I have 27 years with the New York City Fire Department. I have 20 years in Hazardous Materials Company 1 in the rank of firefighter and lieutenant. I was in a squad company prior to coming into hazmat, and I had worked in engines and trucks prior. I feel honored to be here speaking with you guys today, working with UL. This is basically a continuation of the symposium that we did in FDNY in September. So we're going to start out with the opening video from September to just give you a flavor on what's going on in the city of New York.
Investigators say a lithium-ion battery.
The culprit, lithium-ion batteries.
200 lithium-ion batteries.
FDNY says a lithium-ion battery caused the fire.
The fires related to lithium-ion batteries have been on the rise.
The FDNY says a battery from an electric bike is the cause for Thursday's fatal apartment fire.
Caused by several exploding batteries on e-bikes.
It was one of 4 fires started by e-bikes in a single day.
One man is dead and a woman is clinging to life.
There were numerous lithium-ion batteries in occupancy.
This is the 3rd death this year.
We're now learning what caused that fire, and the FDNY says it's an alarming trend.
This fire was caused by lithium-ion batteries.
As more people get these e-bikes with these lithium-ion batteries, they do expect that these cases will continue to rise.
In the first 4 months of 2022, the FDNY reported a 233% increase.
Scores of fires in New York City, and all of them caused by lithium-ion batteries.
126 fires, 74 injuries, and 5 deaths just this year, including a 36-year-old woman and a 5-year-old child.
Last year, officials say there were more than 100 similar fires with 79 injuries and 4 deaths.
Lithium-ion batteries are known for malfunctioning, but this?
A raging high-rise fire in the East Village that left 1 person dead and sent teenagers climbing out of the windows.
Firefighters desperately rescued several families.
Flame shot from the roof of the building.
The fire reached 2 alarms before it was under control.
Investigators say this was started by an e-bike.
New York City Fire Department has been sounding the warning for a long time about this.
That was just from September. The numbers are changing so quickly that even this slide that I put together from the beginning of March isn't up to date. 2022, we had 220 investigations by the fire marshals regarding lithium-ion batteries. 6 fatalities, 147 injuries, and it basically doubled the 2021 numbers. This year, we've already registered our 3rd fatality, so these slides are a little bit older. So it's constantly changing, but it is a challenge. So what we're going to talk about, I'm going to expand on what Adam and the other presenters went on this morning, and we're going to look specifically on how they relate to lithium-ion mobility devices. So we'll talk about just a brief battery overview. We're going to look at the failure modes and what we see with mobility devices, because there's some unique things that we see there. We're going to talk about fire operations, post-fire extinguishment, and some community risk assessment. That there's some unique things in New York City, why it's so prevalent there. We'll talk about this, but this is going to be present in every community. So on the failure modes, all right, Adam does a really good job. That FSRI course is incredible. If you haven't taken it, you should take it. And we'll talk about thermal, mechanical, electrical, factory defects. But one of the things that's not really on that flow chart, right, he mentions it, all right, but do it yourself, and I call stupid humans, because some of the things we've seen in New York City really leave you scratching your head on how could people do this. So thermal abuse. When we look at the mobility devices coming into the home, so you could have the mobility device be the cause of the fire, but they could also be heat impacted. There's a fire from some other reason, but almost every home has some sort of lithium-ion battery in it, right? being stored or charged near heating sources. I tell a story. We lost a private dwelling in Queens from a skateboard, an electric skateboard, lithium-ion batteries. And skateboards, they're unwieldy. Trip over them all the time, so people look to hang them someplace. Well, this is an older building, and it had those big cast iron radiators with the fins. It works really good on hanging your skateboard there. Gentleman was charging his skateboard while it's hanging on the steam radiator. The steam comes up. They typically can get over 200 degrees right on the battery module, and the private dwelling went away because it was being stored near a heat source. That also happens in some of the larger buildings. They're going to put these in boiler rooms. Heat source, right? Charging while covered with insulating items. Cell phones are incredibly safe, but I have kids and nothing drives me crazier than going into my kid's room and seeing the cell phone tucked underneath their pillow because they had to have their phone up until the minute they lost consciousness, right? So we don't want to do that. Electrical abuse is certainly one of the concerns. Adam had mentioned using a mismatched charger. We see that a lot. Right? One of the challenges is the plug end of the charger will fit many different devices, but you have to go all the way back to the block or the transformer that plugs into wall to understand the polarity, the current, and the voltage. And most people, if I plug it in and the light goes on, I'm good, but that's not necessarily a best practice. The battery management system is such an important thing about keeping us safe. Remember how I said our cell phones are incredible, right? The battery management system is really dialed in. The manufacturers spent a lot of money on that. If I left my cell phone in the car and it was too hot in the car, I'm going to get that temperature thing. I can't turn it on. I can't charge it. That's your battery management system working for you, right? But faulty, defective, and when we do the DIY stuff, very often, they won't even have a BMS. They'll be like, oh, the charger will do that for me. That could be a disaster. That's all electrical abuse. And when we look at mobility devices, water ingress. So we have 65,000 delivery workers that rely on mobility devices to make a living. And very often they're out all types of weather, 16 hours a day. Salt spray, water, and if it gets into the battery module or the electronics package, you can start to have electrical abuse and failure of that system. Mechanical abuse. This is very relevant to mobility devices. So if we have like a power wall inside a garage, there's not a lot of mechanical vibration going on there. Same thing with the large utility scale ESSs. But mobility devices, portable consumer electronics, certainly can have more impact driving on the city streets, jumping curbs, potholes, coming up and down the stairs, removable batteries, and then you drop it and it bounces down the stairs. Those are all mechanical abuses that a battery can be. Obviously, very traumatic things like puncture or high-speed impact that you see in automobile wrecks are also a problem. But there's a lot of these things that you're seeing, particularly in mobility devices, that can lead to failure later on down the line. Factory defects. Even the best names in the business have had recalls. Adam talked about the separator. It is a very precision operation to make these batteries. Some factories are better than others. And even when you have these very, very small as a percentage failure rate, if you have something like 0.0001% failure rate, but you make 100 million cells a year, mathematically, you are going to have defective cells go out into the world. Recalls are only partially effective. In the automotive sphere, we have a good way of tracking the owner from owner to owner based on vehicle registration. But there are still people that are dying today from Takata airbags that didn't bring them in for their recalls. When we do low-cost mobility device purchasing, the tracking of those purchases are very small, so it's very hard to say you're your recall is going to be effective. This is my favorite one. A little different than the UL guys, so this maybe not be the scientific term, all right? There is a definite area of improvement for education. Most people assume a battery is a battery is a battery. They've been using alkaline batteries for their entire lives. They know the safety, they know they have no problems, and they start building these. There's a couple different things. One, they're looking to make things cheaper. I don't want to buy a Powerwall, I can go make my own. In the mobility device spheres, all right, I can go online and my device, it says it tops out at 20 miles an hour. Well, if I modify the controller, I can make it go 40 miles an hour. Right? That's a problem. Right? So sometimes it's performance focused, sometimes it's budget focused, but they can all lead to bad outcomes. So to expand on this, right now today, you can go to any number of sources and you can buy used modules, you can buy used cells, and we said, go make your own Powerwall. This guy, he's showing you how to blow apart a module. Right? Remember we said mechanical damage could, so what he's doing is they have this insulating foam for vibration and for temperature management, and he has a plastic chisel that if you go down into the comments, he'll sell you that plastic chisel, right? And he's showing you how to blow apart a battery module. Then, I don't have it in the slide, but he'll put the cell in solvent to get that sticky foam off because it's kind of, it's a little problematic. So he'll teach you to do it yourself, or he'll make you a module for your bike at like half the cost of what the OEM guy is. So we see these having problems. A little summary slide, kind of what we went over just now and this morning. There's a number of different factors that can lead to thermal runaway. That thermal runaway, now we can see to cell propagation. So that's what we're going to go into. So the interesting thing about thermal runaway is whenever we're confronted with something new, we kind of we have a playbook in our head and we try to take things that we've known and we try to figure it out. And the first time I heard thermal runaway, I used my firefighting knowledge. And I'm thinking that, all right, my thermal imaging camera is going to be my predictor of thermal runaway. And if I put the thermal imaging camera on and it's hot, then it's probably going to have a high likelihood of running away from us. Nothing could be further from the truth. While, yes, high heat or elevated heat can cause that, but whatever causes that separator failure from any one of those modes that we talked about, you can have a totally cold pack, room temperature pack, and when that separator fails, instantaneously, you have an event. I actually had this happen to me at an e-bike store fire back in and we'll reference it in a couple of minutes, but in this particular case, we had multiple battery packs that had been involved in fire. They were extinguished by the first due companies. I came in as a hazmat unit. I put my thermal imaging camera on everything. Everything was ambient temperature. I turned my back on it, and literally 10 seconds before, when I had the thermal imaging camera on it, and I had multiple packs fail. So thermal runaway, the thermal imaging camera, yes, I would be concerned if I saw a warm battery pack, but it's not an accurate predictor that everything is safe. So what we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the rest of this discussion, right? What is the impact on the Fireground? Because this is going to impact us, right? It could be the cause of the fire. We're going to talk about advanced fire on arrival, people trapped, the deflagration, how that impacts us, how fire dynamics change, inhalation injuries, overhaul changes, reignition kind of ties in with the overhaul, and we'll talk about stranded energy. Steve talked about some of the different things, and he showed the difference between a legacy fire and a more modern plastics type fire. There were a couple times in the fire service where the game changed. Going from legacy to like hydrocarbon based everything, the game changed, right? That took place before I started in the fire service. One of the things at the beginning of my career was energy efficient windows. Right? We still had a lot of single pane windows. They would very often fail prior to the fire department arrival, right? And now we would have a fully vented fire before we even got there. Energy efficient windows come in, and the science and the work that UL have done with flow path and ventilation tactics, that all became because of the energy efficient windows. And the fire service had to adapt. We're at one of those times where the fire service has to adapt. The electrification revolution is here. It's only going to increase in the years to come, and the fire service has to adapt. And hopefully events like this and the educational programs that have been put forth will get us up to speed as quickly as we can. So a little video, you may have seen this one. This was popular on YouTube. Cause of the fire: stored indoors, charging. This guy's technique isn't exactly the best, but he's not a coward. He tried. Couple learning things as we watched in the last couple seconds of this video. Watch the cells being ejected. And those cells can start other fires. That has an impact on fire investigation. A standard thing, back from when I was a probie, that, well, if you saw multiple sources of ignition, call the fire marshals because it's a suspicious fire. But you could have multiple sources of ignition because the battery module blew apart. We have a couple examples we're just going to go through.
New information tonight on a fire that killed a man late last night. Investigators now say a lithium-ion battery sparked the flames. The fire broke out on 89th Street in East Elmhurst. CBS 2's Jennifer Bisram spoke with the man who says he was there when the battery exploded.
Officials say this was a fast-moving fire that injured several people and took the life of a man who lived inside. Tonight, we're learning the source of the fire, an electric scooter. Bright orange flames engulfed this three-story home on 89th Street in East Elmhurst just before midnight. Dozens of firefighters worked quickly to put out the blaze and get families trapped inside out. At least one person in the home and one firefighter were brought out in stretchers.
Once I opened the door on the second floor, those stairs was already on fire like in seconds.
Jose Corona made it out just in time, but says his e-bike started the fire.
I unplugged the scooter, the electric scooter, and as I unplugged, I was on the first floor, went to the second floor to eat breakfast. As I'm putting my cereal on the bowl, I heard an explosion, pop, like a gunfire.
The FDNY tweeting this afternoon, fire marshals determined the inferno was caused by a...
This incident, this guy was awake. And within a couple of seconds, the stairs were fully engulfed in flames. When fire units arrived, the stairs had taken such a heat load, an FDNY firefighter fell through the stairs, and he may not return to duty.
Lithium-ion. This is an extraordinary amount of damage from this single bike that you can see here to my left. This call came in around 10:41 a.m. this morning. We are still here fighting this fire. We have over 50 units, fire and EMS on scene. We have over 200 members.
Our response time was less than 4 minutes. We quickly stretched a hose line into the building and started to extinguish the fire. The amount of fire that is produced by a single battery in just under 5 minutes we were unable to get ahead of it. It had spread quickly into the void spaces of the building and took off from there. It was a difficult operation. We quickly went to a defensive operation. You see these tower ladders. We stopped the fire from spreading to the furniture store, but the fire had already spread to the laundromat.
There is extraordinary damage. This entire building behind me is completely destroyed. The roof is caved in, there is nothing left. And it is all because of this one single bike. And so we really want to emphasize to the public how much damage can be done by a single bike, but I think that this shows how really dangerous this is to our members, to the public.
The e-bike fire, it's so much force behind it so quickly. Like I said, under 5 minutes, we already were putting water on that e-bike fire, and it had already spread throughout the building. It's really something that we have never seen before, as far as a small fire turning into something like this in a matter of a few minutes.
So one of the questioners before the break was talking about fire investigation. Well, how do you know whether it was the e-bike was the cause of the fire or the e-bike failed because of the fire? This particular incident, we had security camera. So this is the e-bike failing in the grocery store that was just referenced in the last clip. And there's a community in the Bronx that doesn't have a block of stores because of one e-mobility device. Impact on the Fireground. Advanced fire upon arrival. Battery failure to flash over. Steve actually had it around 25 seconds. I usually say 1 to 2 minutes. It's that fast. All right? So there's little no reaction time. People are trapped. And the deflagration can fail multiple windows. So you have a fully vented fire and you have advanced fire growth because it has all the oxygen that it could want. And this leads to this next event, which happened in the middle of the day.
Fire, EMS, and dispatch did an extraordinary job rescuing a number of civilians, including an incredible roof rope rescue that many of you have seen on the 20th floor.
That is a last resort in the FDNY. We rescued 2 civilians from the fire department. It's what we saw today was our training, our teamwork, and our absolute dedication.
This is an extremely rare type of rescue. We don't do this often. To put members on rope and to put 4 members on rope today is, something pretty special.
46 injuries, 36 transportations.
This is close to our 200th fire this year, where the cause of the fire is a lithium-ion battery from micro-mobility device.
I cannot emphasize enough the extraordinary work of our members this morning in unbelievably dangerous conditions.
In this fire, there were multiple mobility devices. One of the things that the disturbing trend that we see in New York City is a lot of people are taking to home repair and servicing businesses. So you would not think that you would find multiple devices in a single family apartment. And those individual cells, sometimes we're finding hundreds or over 1,000 cells in an apartment. UL showed some deflagrations and explosions. Well, let's see what it actually does, what we're seeing in real life. All right? This deflagration and explosion, this happened after the fire department arrived on scene. And New York City housing project, windows are incredibly robust. and it blew out the windows, and the window frame landed 15 feet from a member who was coming off the truck because of that deflagration that we talked about earlier. I can't stress the partnership and how valuable it is with UL. When UL came to our symposium, we spoke about what we were seeing. And we collaborated, and they're like, okay, what are you seeing? What types of devices are you seeing? And they went out and they purchased bikes from New York City or scooters from New York City, and they brought them to their facility, and they scientifically validated what we were seeing in the city. So it's one thing for us to say, yes, this is what we're seeing. It's another reason to say scientifically why. So in the test that they show, you saw the bedroom one. This is another view of that. People do bring them into their bedrooms in New York City, as incredible as that may sound. So we're seeing the thermal, we're seeing the infrared up in the upper right-hand corner. We're starting to see the first failure gases go now, right? And keep in mind, watch the timer there. It's not very long. Now we have ignition. The ignition blows out the window, so now we have that fully vented fire. And how long does it take for flashover? Steve used the numbers this morning. He only had about 15 seconds from the time that the smoke alarm went off to the time that the room was involved in flashover. That is not a recipe for survival. The second part of the series that they did it in the living room. 1,600 square foot house, open floor plan kitchen, open floor plan living room. Some of the bedroom doors were closed. The furthest bedroom away was open. And you saw multiple windows fail when we had ignition. So as these cells are failing, they're putting flammable combustible gases into the compartment, and then a source of ignition is probably another cell failure or the heat of the cells going into thermal runaway. And the damage that it can cause is tremendous. And these things are happening before 911 is even being called. First thing you see on the thermal down in the lower left, we're starting to see venting of some of the cells. They're seeing more venting, more cells go. Upper right, we could actually start to see visual now the failure gases. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see two sides of the building go. What you don't see in the back is they had big doors that were held in place, and it blew the doors off the hinges at the top, the amount of force that's there. And this is from one mobility device. And this explains why we're seeing roof rope rescues in the daytime. This explains why there's people trapped. This is why we're seeing fatalities because of these devices. Quick case study in Manhattan. This made national news in a lot of markets. Mobility device. This was also another case where they were doing a business in an apartment, so there were multiple devices there. The children went out the window. In this slide, if you see the header in the upper right-hand corner of the slide, there was actually a wall beneath that header. It was blown down by the deflagration. It went to zero visibility. The children report that They just saw a little bit of light, and that was from the window that had blown out. They didn't break the window. The deflagration blew it out. One tragedy helped mitigate another. That building was impacted by Hurricane Sandy, and they hardened the building by putting the utilities up on the roof. That's why that piping was there. It normally wouldn't have been there. We had one fatality in this event, and we had somebody put into the burn center. So let's talk about, we talked about some of the stuff that we see in the beginning. Let's talk about impact on fire dynamics. This video comes out of London, all right? It's in the wintertime. It takes place in January, so the windows should be closed. I believe the first deflagration blows out the windows, but you're going to hear pops and you're going to see increase of failure gases and then fireballs.
Abbiamo usato gli estintori, ma niente, proprio vede, ormai a peggiorare.
Now, if we don't have failures of the windows, all that fuel load is being put into the compartment. And that's what we're going to confront when we come into that apartment. This Bronx case study was pretty tragic. The cause of the fire was an electric space heater, but as we go through the next couple slides, you'll see there was a mobility device in there, and we can think about how it would impact our operations. This was a very problematic fire. We could easily do a case study on the entirety of the fire and building codes and whether or not equipment worked. Right? Very big challenge for the fire service that day. 17 fatalities, multiple rescues. This was a tough fire for us. So we're seeing the fire come out of the windows. This was a duplex type apartment, which is basically, if you don't have them in your area, you can have a 2-story apartment, right, with one entrance. In this one, you entered on the 2nd floor, and there were stairs to go down to the lower level, kind of like going into a basement. So this is the upper floor. Some of the fire devastation that you see in the upper floor. Of course, one of the tragedies is that the apartment door wasn't closed when people evacuated from the apartment. So the conditions were very tough in the hall.
See, here's the hallway. Outside the apartment, totally incinerated. Now Mark's gonna open his door. Hold on, Mark, not yet. So we'll show you what a door does in these. Just the door closed, look. So here's the door, totally incinerated, right? Open that up, Mark, please. Look at the apartment. Clean as day.
So that slide, not specifically battery related, but the close the door message that we actually saw in the intermission, it rings true, and we should promote it every opportunity that we can. As we come into the video, this is the stairs going down. Just at the top of the stairs, there was an e-mobility device. There was an e-bike. And we could see in the diagram, the space heater that caused the fire was on the lower level. The mobility device was at the top of the stairs, so it's getting all that heat impact from the fire that's coming in. The mobility device failed during the attack phase of the fire attack, of the engine advancing in with the truck. And the chief interviewed the first arriving companies, and they said there were fireballs rolling down the hallway, and the conditions changed in an instant. The closest thing I could say, we have these references in our back, would be like a wind-impacted fire and the windows failing. That's how quickly it could change. So if you're going to add all this fuel into an already ignited environment, it could be very challenging. In this next slide, we're going to talk about jet fires. I want you to think about where the line went and where the mobility device was. So jet fire, all right? It doesn't happen every time, but think about at the top of the stairs, where is the hose? The hose is at the top of the stairs. Now we're going down. Firefighters are taught never to pass fire, extinguish the fire as you go, right? Because we don't want fire behind us and fire in front of us. So I have a concern that if we advance past a mobility device to go extinguish the fire in the basement and it fails later, that we could lose our hose line. So failure during the fire attack, unexpected rapid fire growth, right? We have that potential deflagration of the windows. Now the fire dynamic changes, right? We would definitely don't want to have burn through of the nozzle, all right? We could have fire behind the nozzle team and the search team. That's a terrible thing, all right? And potential loss of water from a burst length, all right? Our procedures say that the second line is supposed to back up the first line. So we have some procedures that will help if this does happen. Initial fire suppression. Water works. It's not perfect, but it works. We saw what happened in the UL test and the application of water, how effective it was, right? So you can actually have these fail underwater, right? So I'll show you a video. Maybe not. Okay, little tech difficulty. My slide's not there. I had a video that showed that battery modules underwater, they failed underwater. You could see the flash underwater and the gases are coming out. Some of the gases are water soluble, some of them are not. So if we're talking about hydrogen, not water soluble. So even if it's completely submerged in water, as that hydrogen comes out of the water, that is a potentially ignitable mixture, right? But the nice thing about water is effective, and it's something that we're bringing to every firefight. So the initial fire suppression, what we're trying to do, thermal runaway in the cell, once that cell is failing, we're not going to stop that. We're trying to stop that cell-to-cell propagation. Water works for that. Next study, because we're going to talk about reignition. After extinguishment, we could have reignition. We alluded to it this morning, or we spoke to it this morning. This was an e-bike shop in Queens. I went on the initial assignment. This is where I was talking about the thermal imaging lesson that solidified in my mind. Initial fire suppression was there. There was over 1,000 pounds of batteries in there. It was beyond my overpacking capabilities. We're learning I could do a couple of mobility devices, but I can't overpack 1,000 pounds of batteries. I didn't have enough equipment. So at the time, we said we're going to leave a watch line in place and we're going to hire a contractor to come in. And one of the capability gaps is the insurance industry isn't aware of the cost of doing it right, and there's not enough regulations to identify who is a competent contractor. So we had a multi-agency meeting. A competent battery contractor provided a quote. It was expensive. It was rejected by the insurance company. They hired somebody else that didn't understand or appreciate the hazards, right? We left the watch line in place. And that's a challenge. You were talking about leaving resources. Leaving resources is a challenge, right? 80% of this country is volunteer fire service. It's even more of a challenge for them, right? So the contractor comes, doesn't take all the heat-impacted batteries out. Takes some, leaves some, but releases the watch line. Doesn't tell them that there's a continuing hazard. All these mobility devices had batteries in them in the front. They took the batteries out of the back from the heaviest area of fire involvement. 30 hours later, the building's on fire again. We talk about inhalation threats. And there's a lot of questions about it, all right? No fire smoke is good for you, right? So they talked about the hydrogen fluoride. There's doing some active research on that. Adam referenced the RISE study, which you can look up online, but we don't want to inhale any of these gases. The hydrogen is a flammable gas. We also talked about earlier about the difference between an inside event and an outside event. Now, before I play the next video to show you that, FAA did a study, one single 18650 cell charged to 100% state of charge releases 8 liters of gas. That's a tremendous amount. But that's at 100% concentration. That's not necessarily the ignitable mixture. That'll expand out further to that ignitable mixture. In the UL studies that they did in the private dwelling, there were 130 cells in that scooter, which is the exact same scooter that's on the street in this next. In my video clips, they're not working. This reignition impacts overhaul. So we saw those ejected cells in that first video of the guy in the shorts by the pool in the kitchen. So when they blow apart, sometimes if they jet out, they will have expended all of their energy and all their material. But when the battery packs blow apart, very often they take uninitiated cells with them. And if we bury them under fire debris, they're reignitions. So we need to account for all those cells. So that will give us a guidance on overhaul. Now we tell our guys, if you're chasing active fire, chase active fire for overhaul. But if the time allows, you're just checking to make sure that we got everything, please take a moment, and we have procedures on how to move the cells out of the immediate fire area and then continue your overhaul. Otherwise, we're going to come in and we're going to have to sift through the fire debris, much like an arson investigation, to look for these cells. Now, the most important thing of this, when we talked about those toxic by inhalation and those flammable gases, right? Yes, of course, we should all be wearing our masks in overhaul, but we want to stress that if you're in the proximity to a heat-impacted battery, you need to be wearing your SCBA and breathing the air out of the cylinder. Because they fail so quickly, you will not be able to respond to that threat, and you will be enveloped in a toxic, flammable gas cloud. So if we have a heat-impacted battery, we need to handle it with self-contained breathing apparatus. They have their videos, I have mine. I hope this one's going to work. When we were doing our symposium, we were told we were doing standoff distances, and they're like, okay, the most we've seen the cells fly is 75 feet. So we put up some safety barriers, and we're like, all right, we marked out the crowd beforehand, and we did some dry runs of the test. All right. Outside, we had cells fly 135 feet. So we wound up building a cage for subsequent testing, so we had improved safety. All right, we want to remove, we hit this, all right, new tools, all right, hazmat guys using arson and wildland rakes, but this is what we do, all right, we want to account for all those cells because we don't want to come back to the fire again like we saw in that e-bike store. Stranded energy. This is incredibly important, and this is new to the fire service. We see something that's all burnt up, we think it's safe, and it's not. So this one, apparently all my videos are not playing. This one, they hit with a steel shovel, and you saw electrical shorting in the video. All right, it's not something you want to do. This was to illustrate a point. Documentation and notifications. They were talking about before about the insurance industry. This is a challenge for a number of different things. There's money involved, right? Consumer Product Safety Commission. There's fatalities, there's injuries. Is it a defective product, right? The knifers reports. How do we account for these? There's definitely areas of improvement and capability gaps here, all right? A lot of it is the interview. And the interview really should be done by the first arriving units. If the fire marshal is an hour out, right, try to gather some information. Did you hear anything, like the man described, the popping sound? Did you smell anything, right? Was the device charging? Was the device in use? Where was the device in the structure? All of these things are perishable as the event plays on. So try to gather them as best as we can. Movement of damaged batteries. Because these are reignition threats, there's a couple different moves that we can do. The first one is immediately moving it out of the fire area so we can conduct overhaul. That can be done by operations level trained units, bunker gear, SCBA, line in place. Sometimes they'll move them to a tub, put them underwater. Sometimes they'll put them in a bucket, keep them underwater. Not perfect, but better than just leaving them there. Right? Hazmat units will come in and we'll overpack them. We'll talk about that in a future slide. And then removing it from the scene. Right? There's a couple of things. We always say avoid words like never and always. Never move damaged batteries, heat-impacted batteries in an occupied elevator. We can use elevators if we have them in fireman service and we have control over the elevator, but no member will go in them. Next couple slides, we're going to talk about discussions for your communities. Community risk assessment. Where are the batteries in your community? And when you go look for them, you're going to find them in surprising places. All right? Do the codes exist for the challenges? And the likelihood is not. All right? Conduct public outreach on proper use and disposal. All right? One of the things that scares me, and why I have that as a bullet point, is dorm safety. Right? Kids love mobility devices, and now they have it in a college dorm, which is a cinder block little box. Right? I don't want my kids sleeping in one of those with a mobility device. Right? And a battery disposal plan. So a couple slides real quick. This is an interesting one I found out and it really scared me. Right? Bicycle shop, Chinatown. Right? There are hundreds of batteries on charge in this occupancy. They do repairs there too. Oh, and it happens to be on the ground floor of a turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, non-fireproof building, Chinatown, high occupancy per apartment. And I went there for a battery event. The guy wound up throwing it in the toilet, and the toilet blew up when he threw it in the toilet. I had the glamorous job of me and my guys, now we have to go in and recover the battery. And I went in there, and because it was such an old building, there was no sheetrock above the toilet in this building. So one of those batteries fails in the middle of the night, this could have been a major event in New York City. More scary stuff. The two on the right, those are commuter rails. Those are the Long Island Railroad. One of them is a skateboard. It's plugged in and charging. The other one is an e-bike, plugged in and charging. That one has about 118 650 cells in it. And the one on the left is a homemade range extended bike. So that, it might be a little bit hard to see, but the blue arrow is pointing to red cables where this guy wanted to double his range, so he added, on his own, he added another battery. That's a lot smaller than the 1,600 square foot house in the UL. And now you have 100 people in a car and one of these fails. This scares me. Size up. We've been talking about the mobility devices, right? The bikes, all of those bikes are e-bikes. None of them have batteries on them. That means all of those batteries are in the apartment someplace. Photovoltaic, if I see solar, I need to think this is a potential lithium-ion battery backup system. I mentioned before, numerous fires in New York City have been a result of illegal home repair businesses. Like I said, I go in with the mindset, all right, it's a private dwelling, there's one device in there, and then I find hundreds or 1,000 cells in that Have a battery disposal plan, all right? If we don't have a battery disposal plan, where are they going to end up? They're going to end up in the municipal waste stream. This video works. So I found that online. It came out around Halloween. They did that in the UK. But it is a very good video, the impact that this could have. What's the cost of a garbage truck? What's the cost of a transportation facility? What's the life risk that could be there if we don't have these plans in place? We need to think about what we're doing with these power walls. Power walls heat impacted. Maybe it's not the cause of the fire, but it's heat impacted because the lawnmower went in fire in the garage. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's 20 degrees out. It's single-family private dwelling. Do I allow the occupants to reoccupy the house and have a fire ignite a couple hours later? I don't feel comfortable with that. Well, who's taking this power wall? The utility doesn't want it because it's on the other side of the meter. The installation company's like, we don't do that. The insurance company's like, we got to pay for that? Right? So we need to talk with our people and come up with a plan. In my mind, if I can get the insurance agency and the regulators in, if you want a permit for a power wall, you have to have an insurance policy in place that'll take care of the disposal. You'll have to have a contract in place with the disposal agency. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can go look up your permit and it shows which your contractor is, right? But that takes work, right? We don't know what we don't know, right? That's why events like this are important. All right, so consider that authorized contractor list. One of the things, I have all these devices. Adam talked about, like, he's segregating some of the equipment, right? Everything lives in the garage. I still got to plug it in, it's in the garage. I like that. But one of the things I'm teaching now or drawing the attention to the safety factor is these network smoke detectors. It used to be you had to have them hardwired. Now you can have them wireless. So if I have a bunch of lithium-ion batteries in my garage or in the basement, have the network smoke detectors. That might buy you the time that you need to successfully leave the area.
Use of interconnected smoke alarms means that when any alarm activates, all smoke alarms will sound. We recommend interconnected smoke alarms be installed in all bedrooms and living areas to provide you and your loved ones the best possible protection in the event of a fire.
Tools of the trade, we're going to go into this, right? If we're going to overpack damaged batteries, we have to get them out of the cases, all right? The suppression media that we pack them in, it's not magic, it's got to touch the cells. So we have to get them out of the device. This is melted into that mobility device. I can't overpack the whole mobility device. So we have cutting tools, stuff familiar to firefighters. We're going to dump those cells out of that pack. That's at least a kilowatt hour battery in that device. Stranded energy, a new tool for the trade. Some people may have had lineman's gloves, but you may want to invest in a program of having electrically insulated gloves. Now, keep in mind, you can't just buy the gloves. You have to have a quality assurance program. Normally, they need to be inspected every 6 months. So we talked about stranded energy. Right now, we're using this cell block material and drums. All right, that's what we're overpacking them in. It's a fire suppressant material and a steel drum. All right, reach out to manufacturers, figure out a program if that's appropriate for you. Maybe you have a county team that may have some of these capabilities already in place. But once I get it in the drum, what do I do with it? All right, don't leave it for the homeowner because then it's going to end up in the garbage truck, and we all saw what happened. Other issues, documentation and notification, right? I had a fatality. Well, maybe somebody's family wants to hire somebody to sue somebody and they want to check that battery out. Well, where's the battery? So we will label drums if we had an injury or a fatality with red, and they will get segregated for a period of time to see if somebody comes looking for them. All right? You may need chain of custody issues. These are just things to think about. Right? These are some of my guys. Right? They're working. They're using the tools, the electrical insulated tools. They're looking at the gloves, and they're taking multiple devices and they're overpacking them. One of the things that I'm going to leave you with today is I'm going to put up a QR code in a moment, and it's going to be access to the Google Drive from our symposium in September. It is a repository of information. It is a living archive. I add to it quite frequently, and as our partners like UL and NFPA provide me more information, I'm going to put it there. All right? Steal the information, use it, share it freely, give it out to everybody. This is about safety. It's about making sure that people don't get hurt. So I'll leave this up there. I went a couple minutes long, I think. But does anybody have any questions?